Welcome to Baddie, a monthly podcast by For the Breast of Us, the first breast cancer community for all women of color, where we share real-life experiences, information, and education to help you live your best life after a breast cancer diagnosis. Welcome to Baddie. Welcome to Baddie.
Hey baddies, my name is Cynthia and I am a breast cancer Baddie Ambassador from Houston, Texas, but I'm originally and always will be a Cali girl. I was diagnosed with stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma in 2018, and I'm currently going through hormone therapy for the next few years. I am also a proud Bayesian woman and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Welcome to the latest episode of Baddie to Baddie, brought to you by For the Breast of Us. We are the only online community for women of color dedicated to helping you live your best life after a breast cancer diagnosis. And I'm Cynthia. I am a breast cancer thriver and ambassador with For the Breast of Us. And I'm here with Raquel, Katrece, who are survivors, and Jacinth and RN, who has been a caregiver to her own family members with the cancer diagnosis. And tonight we're going to discuss how we've all navigated the healthcare system after a cancer diagnosis and treatment. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Let's start with some introductions of our guests. Raquel, you want to start first?
Yes. Hello, my name is Raquel Godinez. I am 37. I was diagnosed 5 years ago, November 2016. I felt a lump on my right breast, kind of near the underarm, and I kind of put it off. I didn't really want to think that it was anything. So I finally, after maybe 2 months, I went to see my primary doctor, and he ordered a mammogram, and then it was actually a very quick process. Wait, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to go into all that right now, or just?
You can if you like.
I'm getting ahead of myself here. So I'll just continue. So he ordered a mammogram, and within like a week, I had my result. They called me at work. It was like 8 a.m. in the morning, and they called me that it was abnormal. I needed to come in for a biopsy, and it was just like a whirlwind of do this and see this and go here and do this, and it was just survival mode basically. I did I did CT scan, I did PET scans, like all these different things. I was off work for 3 months. I did initial lumpectomy. They didn't get all the margins. So then I had to go back and do an axillary dissection and a re-excision. And basically I ended up doing 4 lumpectomies total because they kept not getting all the margins. So, and I had the choice of mastectomy, but I didn't want to do that. It was just too much for me to process of not having breasts. And I have pretty large breasts too. So it was just like a mind play, it was just a lot. So I retained my breast tissue at least now. And after all the surgeries, I did do 33 rounds of radiation. So the whole process took about a year because I took a break after the surgeries and just and then I went on tamoxifen for 2 years, and then I got off of that after 2 years and had my babies within the last 3 years. So it's been just a lot going on. And I kind of look back on it and I think I wish I had a patient navigator. There was no patient navigator in my healthcare system. My only advocate was really my oncologist, and she retired 2 or 3 years ago. So it's been rough. And then having babies under the care of an oncologist has been interesting too, because they would rather that with hormone positive breast cancer, they would rather that you not do that. So there's a lot going on, but I'll just end for now with that.
Well, welcome. We're excited to hear more about your story. Katrece, you want to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Katrece Nolan, and I am a survivor of stage 3 inflammatory breast cancer. I was diagnosed back in 2013, so that's 9 years ago, and so glad to be able to speak with you all here today. It was a very challenging experience to even get the diagnosis, and then once received, it was just a whirlwind, but in many instances, a lot of waiting. And that waiting was a struggle between the various elements of treatments and diagnoses and testing and so forth. But thankfully, about 9 months later, I had completed at least the core of the treatment. And that treatment consisted of chemotherapy and then surgery, where I had a double mastectomy. And then it followed with radiation. And with inflammatory breast cancer, you're not recommended to get any type of reconstruction for at least 2 years. But in my case, about 4 years later, I was then finally able to have reconstruction. And that was in the form of a deep flap reconstruction. So I look forward to sharing with everyone today the various hurdles I had to go over with regard to the healthcare system and that entire episode. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And Jacinth, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name is Jacinth Green, and I work as a registered nurse. And my experience with cancer is just through my parents and caregiving for them, and having to navigate through the healthcare system. And then also little tips that I've picked up along the way, just being a nurse. So yeah, thank you all for having me here.
Well, great. I'm really appreciative of you all taking time out of your schedules to be with us tonight and to talk to us about navigating the healthcare system. So for all of our panelists, we're going to start with this question. How familiar were you with the healthcare system and navigating it and insurance prior to your experiences with cancer? And anybody can jump in.
I'll start. So I became a nurse after my mother's cancer diagnosis. Sadly for me, my mom passed away from her cancer. And it was the catalyst for me to become a nurse. But when we were going through the process, I had no idea. I'd never taken care of anyone that was ill. And I was like 22 years old at the time that she was diagnosed. And I didn't have any ideas of what to do, except that I completed a graduate degree. So I knew researching was like one of my skills. Right. And so once we got her cancer diagnosis, I started into research mode to find out more about her cancer, talking to different people, because she was also a nurse at her hospital. And so with that was the influx of, oh, you should choose this doctor, you should choose this doctor. So trying to sift through all of the information that was coming to me as a novice to healthcare, that was kind of like how I was thrown into it. And then through each experience we had, we ended up changing doctors, because interactions, I was like, this one's, not meeting our needs. So that was my introduction.
Anybody else want to share their introduction to the healthcare system?
Sure. So my introduction was through just the lived experience as an adult parent, being married. Essentially, my husband and I, we have 3 kids. And so I had the experience of, having children and, going to the hospital, and that experience. And for all 3 of the children, it varied. With our first child, of course, knew nothing. And then with the second child, I knew enough that when I went into labor, I knew enough to ask for epidural in advance before the Pitocin was delivered. So, I took a little bit from the first instance. So for the second child, we didn't have any issues. For the third child, though, it was totally flipped around. I typically, my water would break before I would deliver. But for the third child, I actually had contractions that I didn't know what they were, because that's not what I'd experienced first in the past. And we went to the hospital early, went, and they said I wasn't dilated enough and needed to go home, and said, would you like to have a sleeping pill? And so I was like, okay, well, you're offering it, so obviously I'm supposed to have a sleeping pill before I have a baby. Went home, they gave me 2. I asked, well, am I supposed to take both? Because you gave me both. Since they gave it to me, I took both. Went home, I went to sleep. Well, guess what? Those contractions were so strong, woke me up out of that, deep slumber that I had. We rushed to the hospital, and I barely made it to the hospital when our water broke. We went into the small triage room where they check to make sure that that's actual, fluids, that you're going to have a baby. And right then and there in the triage room, I delivered before I could even make it to the back. And so that experience led to me having a significant amount of mistrust, because I thought, back, right now we always talk about maternal health. And I think about that now, 12 years later, like, well, what could have happened if? And so given that experience, I started paying way more attention to what the doctor said, insurance and other matters, to include my husband having multiple knee surgeries, and then myself, other surgeries that I had. And so that's really going into the breast cancer experience. I already had a level of, know what you're getting into from the very beginning. Make sure you have those conversations with your healthcare providers up front to try to ensure that you alleviate any type of challenges that you might face in the future.
Raquel, do you want to talk about your introduction to the healthcare system?
Yes. So let's see. I had grown up wanting to be a doctor, wanting to be in the medical field. So I actually worked in hospitals when I was in college, so about 19 years old, 20 years old. And my mother was diagnosed with DCIS at the age of 42. So I was in college at the time. And we had HMO. We've had an HMO basically ever since we were children, my sister and I. So everything's kind of insulated and one-stop shop, this and that. So I mean, in terms of knowing how to do things, I think it was a little easier because it was HMO and getting referrals and things like that. But when it came to my own health experience, I didn't really know much. And then I had an abscess on my back. So I had to do a small surgery for that. So I had some experiences with the healthcare system, and then working also on the business side. I saw it as from that perspective as well.
Okay. And as people of color, and especially women of color, historically, we don't necessarily have good experiences with doctors and with the healthcare system. And then on top of having a diagnosis like cancer, it can be really frightening trying to figure out where to begin, what to do. Do you have any tips for people who are new to a healthcare diagnosis, specifically something like cancer? How should they begin to navigate this healthcare system and their insurance?
I can jump in. So I actually put a list together of things that came to mind while I was preparing to be with you guys tonight. And I think in general, like everyone who has health insurance should take some time, like, you know, sick, not sick, healthy, and in a healthy state is, you know, the best time to really go through your insurance plan and, you know, figure out what your coverage is, like all the details. What would happen if I, you know, were to get diagnosed with, you know, an illness that would require hospitalization, you know, multiple rounds of testings, like what's the process, and write down questions, like get intimate with your healthcare plan and what it has to offer, because then ahead of time, you know, just to be prepared,
Right.
just to study what are you paying into every single month with your policies. And then, you know, so that's kind of where I would start, getting familiar with your healthcare plans, to write your questions down when you come across something. Call up your policy holder and or the insurance company if you have questions, and ask them, you know, talk to a representative and be like, hey, what services would you offer to me? You know, because what happens sometimes too is that you could get into knowledge about having secondary insurance to cover other costs that you would otherwise have to pay a hefty price for out of pocket. So it allows you to figure out what resources are at your disposal, and whatever voids are there, you can start to think about in advance, you know, of what options are available to you. Hospitals, physicians in your network, out of network, what's the cost to you if you know, you have that, you want to see this oncology team, for example, that's outside of your network, what are your options for coverage? So one of the things I would start out with is definitely get to be very knowledgeable about your insurance and the features that it has.
I think that's very, very helpful information, and something that we don't often think about until it's a little too late sometimes. So I really appreciate that. Katrece, do you have anything you want to input in there?
Absolutely. Those are some excellent suggestions that Jacinth had. Things I would add are to understand the management structure at your particular facility that you're visiting, regardless if it's small or if it's large. If it is a smaller practice, beyond just your oncologist or whoever your medical professional is, know who is the office manager. They need to know you. They need to know your name. They need to know who you are. You need to have established or try to establish some sort of relationship. Also know who the benefits manager is. Typically, in a practice, is not the same person, but I would say that the benefits manager, they're typically the ones who are in charge of submitting that insurance paperwork on your behalf. If questions are coming from the insurance company, that's the person who is fielding those questions for you. You know, if you know who that is and you have that relationship, when it comes to perhaps defending certain costs that are being submitted, they're the ones that are going to be going to bat for you. And if they are struggling with, you know, what needs to occur, they will hopefully get in contact with you and try to see if there's a way to resolve whatever that issue is. I would say specifically in navigating healthcare as it relates to the actual providers themselves, that person who is in that room with you for that 15, hopefully more minutes, you need to establish a relationship. You need to know whether or not they have any type of bias. As women of color, you need to know that up front. And a couple ways you can know is, are they listening to you when you ask them questions? Are they focused on you? Are they paying attention? Are they looking at you in the eye? Are they acknowledging that question? Are they understanding what you're asking? And if not, are they asking you to, maybe restate your question in a different way or explain and give more details? And then if they then respond to that question, do you understand what they're telling you? And if you don't understand, you need to ask them to rephrase it in another way that you can understand. And if they're not willing to rephrase that, or if they feel put off in trying to explain that information to you, then that's a sign of a problem. That's a sign of a bias. And if they have that bias, it's highly likely that you'll have inadequate or unequal treatment. And so that's another factor that you need to, 2 quick things you can look at really fast as to whether or not they have a bias. And if they do, you may need to have that conversation about why. Understand, do they see you as a priority patient? I was fortunate enough where I had each of the providers tell me that I was their number one priority. Yes, they have multiple patients, but for me to hear that I'm number one makes a world of difference in terms of my mindset and my attitude when it comes to going through this treatment. Right? They're going to do everything that they can to treat me, but I felt like it was my responsibility to make sure that my body was prepared for whatever activities, whatever actions that I understood completely, so that, we were all on one page, one accord as we were going through the treatment.
That's some very valuable information and some really good tips. I remember during my lumpectomy, once I got connected with the person who was responsible for billing and I could speak to her directly, I was able to get things moving, things changed, ask questions about how much of my copay is. Do I get a refund because I overpay? But I never even thought to think about who was doing that piece. You focus so much on who's going to be my doctor, but there's so many other people working on your behalf. And that is absolutely valuable information.
Absolutely. And I just want to go back about the benefits manager. I wouldn't have even thought to ask about who that person was. Right. Fortunately for me, she actually approached my husband and I and asked us to come in for a meeting. And I was like, who are you? And a meeting? Right. Oh, okay. We'll come in here. And my husband's like, who is this woman? Like, what's she talking to us about? Because, no one's ever approached us as a benefits manager before. So we go into the office and, she's like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm a benefits manager, and, explain what she did. And she said, oh, by the way, we have a, this scholarship, that's what I'll call it. I forgot what she called it, but the scholarship is available. And we're sitting here thinking like, okay, she think because, we're Black, that we're poor or something, right. Right. All these things flowing through our heads. But she's like, no, she's like, we actually have, there's this, one of the medications you have to take at the time, Neulasta, this shot, she explained to us, was like $5,000 a shot. And you're going to need like 6 of them. So my husband and I calculated like 6 times 5, 30. What are you talking about? Right? Who can pay for that? What kind of shot is this? And she's like, but no, don't worry about it. She's like, we have this scholarship. And she's like, regardless of income level, what we have is you just pay the first $35.
Wow.
It will waive the remainder of the cost up to your deductible amount. And then after that, insurance pays the remaining. And what it covered was that gap. Mm-hmm. And, we're just like, well, why didn't you just say that at the first, before you even said who you were?
I got money for you. I can help you pay these bills.
Right? Like, why'd you have to spring the $30K on us, right? Like, we on the 6 times 5. And then, oh, but, here's how much it's covered. Like, no, you should have led with the other thing. Do you not know we are stressed at this moment about this diagnosis? You want to be like, Vanna White, talk about, hey, but, we love her still, see her and talk to her to this day. And so I'm just so thankful. So that's a tip, definitely, to know.
I wish more practices would introduce you to the people in that supportive role of your care, because that is important. And I think even after my first interaction with the benefits manager, I didn't think about it at every step of treatment, and so I think that's really helpful. Raquel, do you have some tips for getting started in this process?
Yes. Well, like I said, I have a HMO, so in terms of billing and all that stuff, well, number one, as a part of HMO, it's huge. So I just kind of feel like a number. So I just learned to call member services, complain about so and so if their bedside manner was not, if they didn't treat me right or whatever. I can always complain, and that's a right that I have as a patient. And then, like I said, there was no patient navigator, so once my oncologist left, I felt like I've seen two different oncologists since then, and one of them, I asked her, well, I want to try for a second child, and what are your thoughts about that? And she kind of said, well, eventually you should just get your ovaries out. And I said, what are you talking about? My cancer, I didn't have BRCA mutations, so why would you bring up such an extreme treatment method with when I'm clearly talking about having another child? I mean, to talk about childbirth to hysterectomy is completely it just didn't make sense to me. I didn't like that. So I feel kind of lost in this whole post diagnosis phase that I'm in. I do need to get a mammogram, my yearly, but I'm breastfeeding. So I think basically my tip is just to, I'm the only person that's watching out for myself. There's nobody calling me. There's no case managers like, hey, Raquel, you need to do this. It's very impersonal. It's this huge, vast system. So I'm the only one who's watching out for myself, and I have to keep myself on track because nobody else is going to do it, basically.
That's unfortunate. And having a good healthcare team is important. How Katrece spoke to it a little bit, but how did you ensure that you felt comfortable with most of your providers? Clearly not all of them, but what are some tips for finding a care team that you really feel like is in your corner?
With my first oncologist, she was just a down lady. Like she just was half Mexican, half Japanese or something. So she was just very down to earth. She, she was just very personable and very knowledgeable. She had been around at the hospital for years, clicked, and then ever since then there hasn't been that click. So it's just I feel like I'm just trying shoes on to get the right fit. But I think, having that relationship with your provider is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that I still had that, but I don't. So, yeah, I mean, I just think it's our right to, demand the best care for ourselves. And, if that takes seeing 5 different oncologists, and that's what it's going to be for me.
A couple of things I recommend are, I know that Raquel mentioned that, her practice didn't have navigators, but I'll tell you that the practice that I visited, they had navigators, but they were not dedicated to the practice, right? They actually had a affiliation with another nonprofit so that if you were not part of that practice, you could actually still schedule a visit with them just to, air out some of the concerns that you have with regard to your general, oncology treatment that you're having. So I would recommend, reaching out to other maybe larger providers and asking them if their navigators might be able to just sit down with you for some questions that you have. Another thing, as far as finding the right providers that are a good fit for you, are to ask your primary care physician. A lot of the doctors in a particular town or city, a lot of them know each other.
Right, they do.
And even if they don't know another oncologist, they know another doctor that they can ask. So it might be a case of, you ask them, they might not have an answer right on the spot, but you could just say, hey, I'm looking for this type of, doctor, this type of oncologist. I could really use a recommendation. If you could please, provide me with a recommendation, I appreciate it. I actually did that for one of my doctors. I ended up, my first surgeon letting that person go, deciding not to go with them for my double mastectomy. I thought I needed someone with a bit more experience than that individual. And what I ended up doing is I contacted the hematology oncologist that was actually part of he was like my secondary expert that I thought I needed because I had the aggressive form of cancer, inflammatory breast cancer. And I asked him, he's in a totally different state. Hey, do you have a breast surgery you recommend? And his response was, well, I have one at my center here in Philadelphia, and I'm in Northern Virginia, and I didn't feel comfortable going that far for surgery, being away from my family. And I asked, what about somebody here in the DC area? Do you have someone you recommend? He's like, I don't have anyone in Pacific, but I have another oncologist that was on the board with me. I would recommend following up with her practice. Granted, I was not one of their patients, and I felt like, okay, this is going to be awkward, but he said to call, I'm calling. I called that oncology office, and I was like, this is going to be a weird question. I'm not one of your patients, but, my doctor in Philly asked me to call this office and ask for a recommendation for a breast surgeon. And I really need someone who's performed at least 100 plus surgeries for someone who's had 100 person IBC surgeries or inflammatory breast cancer. And they were like, okay, well, she's seeing a patient right now, but we'll ask her and get back with you if that's okay. And I was like, that's fine with me. And they got back with me that same day. I got a call back. It's like, hey, we asked, Dr. So-and-so, and she recommends, this particular doctor that was in their practice. And so I called up, I scheduled them, and we hit it off, right away. I mean, he and I, with the breast surgeon, you meet with them quite frequently. And we have an amazing relationship. So don't be afraid to ask around other doctors. The doctors know who the good doctors are, and they know who the bad doctors are.
They do.
Yes, right. If it's your family doctor and they recommend a bad doctor, they would have known from somebody else, and that they have as their patient. If someone's bad, and they're not going to do that because that reflects badly on them. So that's what I recommend.
I like that you even had the foresight to think about the level of experience, of your care team. That's not something that we often think to ask. Like, what is your experience? How long have you been doing this? How often have you seen cases like mine? How often have you cut on skin that looks like mine? And, I had an amazing care team that I adore, but I definitely didn't think anything about their level of experience doing this.
Well, I actually did not have the foresight. It was actually in a breast cancer support group online where I started paying attention to some of the comments, and some of the comments about people traveling certain places to see a breast surgeon. And I started asking, like, well, why are you traveling, away from your regular, this doctor to go see that doctor?
Right.
And someone piped in and said, well, with inflammatory breast cancer, it said it is so critically important for survival that it has to be clear margins. And it has to be someone with some experience to understand that when you are seeking clear margins, it needs to be done the first time. You don't have that opportunity to go back for a second chance. And so it's a lengthy experience in the mastectomy because they are sitting there in surgery. They perform the procedure. They've sent down your samples down to pathology, who's waiting for your samples, and they are waiting for the results before they close you up.
Wow.
And it is that critical that they understood, what's going on. Is it clear? And it's like a team effort back and forth. And if that breast surgeon doesn't understand that, in the case of inflammatory breast cancer, it can be detrimental for your health.
Jacinth, you have worked to be a voice and an advocate for your loved ones. How would you encourage someone, a cancer patient themselves, to advocate? Like, how do we learn to be our own voice?
That is a really good question. It takes courage, is the first thing I would say. I, for one, think the healthcare system is so daunting and it can be very intimidating. But you have to center yourself. And one of the things that I would do when I would go to appointments with my mom, and it's kind of something I've taken into my nursing career, is it's like I hype myself up, and I'm like, I have a duty, whether it be to the person I'm taking care of or to myself, because I myself have traversed the healthcare system on the end of the patient. And it's like game time, game face on. Let's get this done. Like I need to get to the other side, and I need to come out triumphant as best that I can. And it's kind of like I'm envisioning this minefield, if you will, or obstacle course. And I picture myself being victorious. I do a lot of envisioning of getting through each obstacle one at a time. Another thing that I do is I try to, when I was going through things with my mom, I tried very much to stay present. And as a caregiver, or for anyone who is going through the process of having to start on a long journey through, say, cancer diagnosis and treatment, find someone to come with you that is somebody that's, that you feel trustworthy. Because what I can say, sometimes, you go into your appointments and you're kind of sometimes in a fog. It's a lot of information that's coming at you really quickly. And, you may think that you have it all in your head, and then you get home and you're like, what happened? What happened today? Right. So having someone with you that's, able to take in the information that the physician or the nurse is sharing with you, writing it down, being there to hold your hand, support you. I remember times like just sitting there with my mom taking notes. I didn't understand all that was being said, but I took notes with her, and so that later on, if she would be like, okay, what are we doing again? What's coming up for the next appointment? What was that medication that he mentioned? Just keeping track for that person. I also advocate. I'm a big note taker. I write things down. Either pen and paper or on the phone. Ahead of time for appointments, especially, you guys mentioned earlier about these 15-minute slots that providers have, right? And, so I'm one to prepare ahead of time, because normally in between visits, there are questions that come up. And I'm like, I want to ask the provider this time coming up, what can I expect from this treatment, or what side effects, whatever the questions you may have, write them down, so that it kind of gives you an organized agenda, so that when you go in, you can maximize the time that you have with your provider. Also, don't be afraid to ask last minute questions. It doesn't matter what. Do not be afraid to ask last minute questions. If that person feels rushed or makes you feel like your visit is like they're rushing through your visit, don't take that energy on. Again, this is about you. If you are the patient, this is about you, and this is about your life. And so you have to be courageous and be empowered to take charge of, saying, hey, excuse me. And I speak out a lot. I do during visits, excuse me, can we slow down here? I need you to clarify this information for me. So it's okay to take a step back, even if the person in front of you, because a lot of times they may not catch themselves being how they are. And it's okay for you to speak up in that moment and always be okay with advocating for yourself or whoever is you're there for.
And that's very true. And I think it's one of those things that where sometimes you may have to fake it till you make it. You don't have to be truly confident in asking questions or saying, hold on, can you repeat that? Can you explain that a different way? But the more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
And you know what, too? I like to jump in more often times than not when I've come into appointments or, prepared with like an agenda, or something like that. The providers are very receptive to that level of organization because it kind of helps them too to be able to stay on track, stay focused. Also, sometimes it brings in more information than I thought I would ever have access to from the provider, because they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Right.
Let me, I'm happy you were thinking about this, or I never thought a patient would be interested in this. So here's some information that could be relevant,
Raquel, did you feel like being in the healthcare space gave you a leg up, or did you still find yourself having a lot of questions and difficulties? You're muted just before you begin.
I think to some extent, I was fortunate to at least be able to. It was kind of laid out for me, what appointments to do, what consults to see. In the beginning, due to my oncologist, I feel that she made it better, or she helped, the experience along. I don't know if that was due to me being an employee or if she was just a really good oncologist. But now that it's, later time out, I don't think that I have really any, I don't feel at an advantage anymore. For example, I called on Friday to get assigned to a new oncologist, and the call center said, okay, well, we're going to message the department to reach out to you. And I haven't heard from anybody. And, it's been almost a week and nothing. So I need to call again. It's just, now I'm kind of like, just a number again. So yeah, I don't know that working in the same system was an advantage, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So, Katrece, in your book, you have a chapter titled, I've Been Diagnosed and Now What?, where you discuss your navigation challenges. What made you call this out? And as a Black woman, how important is it for you to share this information with other Black women and women of color?
So the reason why I named the book that was I felt like there was just so much time wasted in the waiting period, and the waiting between different appointments and the waiting to just understand what was going on and just trying to understand so many different wheels that were turning all at once. And so I thought would be beneficial to others that, if I could just save, anybody, any amount of time to give them an advantage to getting at least into that first treatment, start fighting even, quicker than they would have if they didn't have access to the book, was the main reason for doing so. Anything from, the health insurance and understanding that, the fact that there are prescription benefit programs. Sometimes you have direct access, you can find them. Sometimes only the provider knows them. The fact that, there's disability insurance and the benefit of it. And if someone, perhaps they haven't been diagnosed with cancer yet and they read the book, hopefully that encourages them to get disability insurance, because my goodness, it saved a lot of headache for me and my family to have that disability insurance. There were so many instances where my husband was like, thank God we had this insurance in place so that we are able to just fight and not be so worried about the financial aspect of having lost this income during this period, because our focus, number one, was to fight. I think it benefits so many people, but really what inspired me to write it was having come across another of our one of my husband's friends, who, it turns out, we didn't know until the second time that they are going through a cancer diagnosis. They hit it the first time. Men who are bald, no one ever asks questions because they think it's just, oh, someone's just gone bald. But it turned out that he was actually going through cancer treatment. But we didn't know until the second time around. And they started just briefly sharing with some people. And I could see, I just have innate abilities to be able to read people and see that, that they were struggling. I grew up, my mother was a counselor. And so I always say that, I learned some of those things from her. But knowing that they were struggling, I asked the question. Well, I didn't know they were struggling, but I could see it. And I asked the question of his spouse to say, hey, how are you guys doing? How are you holding up? And just me asking that question resulted in her just, bursting into tears about the struggle. And I asked, all the different things that you're talking about that you're struggling with, how is, the cancer navigator? Have you been able to talk to them? And she says to me, what cancer navigator? We don't have a navigator. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Your doctor hasn't talked to you about the fact that there's a free cancer navigator available to you at the at the hospital right across the street from his office? And this is your second time going through this. And they said, no, Katrece, they haven't told us anything about any of that type of support. And I was mad. I was just ticked off that here it is. They're going through their second round of cancer treatment, and this critical information hadn't been shared. This doctor couldn't even read their patient enough to understand that they are struggling, that they not care enough to even ask the question, how are you doing? I'm sure if asked that question, they would have shared that there were some challenges they were facing. And so I connected them with a navigation program the very next day. It was a Sunday at church. We talked about it. On Monday, they called. On Tuesday, they had their appointment. Wednesday, she called me back and she said, Katrece, thank God you connected us with her, because now she's getting us access to some of the exact support that we needed. And I just thought, how many other people are going through this, and as doctors are not understanding that it's not just treating the cancer, it's treating the whole being, and the fact that they need that support. And so I hope that the book was just an avenue to be able to, connect people with the various amounts of resources that are going to need in that whole hemisphere of cancer treatment.
And and as a standard of care, I think this information should be shared. You shouldn't have to wait for someone to come to you or to come in looking down enough for you to ask and inquire about what's going on. Some people will be too proud, don't even know it exists, so they don't know to ask. And so in order to not profile or to show a bias or make assumptions, just offer the information to every single patient. That's what it's there for.
Yes, absolutely. I even, after that whole experience, I had a conversation with my oncologist to say, why is it, that so many patients that I've come across, and not from her particular practice, were not getting access to, some of the support services. And I said to her, aren't you all the first line of defense? Aren't you all the one that should be connecting them? And she said, Katrece, absolutely, we are. We are the ones who should be connecting them with that support. She said, but unfortunately, a lot of my colleagues, they're not doing that. And I agree with you, Cynthia. It ought to be a standard of care.
And I just wanted to jump in here to emphasize the importance of these resources. I came across something interesting on NPR this week, and the title of it, I don't know if you guys saw this, Delaware is shrinking racial gaps in cancer death. It's secret patient navigators. And so it features a young lady who works as a patient navigator in one of the healthcare systems in Delaware. And she talks about her role and the services that she provides, from, talking to the patients about what they missed in their appointments, helping them schedule appointments, helping them find resources, how to follow up, and I think we've all been in the situation. I think Raquel alluded to it too. Like sometimes you call and you're told no. No is no. No is not acceptable to me.
Right.
When I have a healthcare crisis. So, I'm always one to try to look for other options, even though you tell me no. I'll be like, nah, it's not really no. What else can we do here? What are my other options? Also something too, one thing that I want to say to our audience is that while physicians are, the ones we think of to go, to have everything together, we have to think beyond just the physician and, think of everyone in the office or think of everyone at the hospital, right? Access to nurses, think about your nurses that come in and take care of you when you're in the hospital setting. Ask questions. Never be afraid to ask them questions because they can talk to people behind the scenes. They may have had things with their own family members. Your caseworkers. Ask, do you guys have a social worker around here? A counselor, a chaplain? You'd be surprised where your help can come from in the most unlikely places or are not as obvious, when you're going through the healthcare system. And like Katrece said, these things should be offered to you, but for some reason they're not. And so that's why I'm really happy to be part of this podcast today, because it's letting people know, even though things aren't offered to you, ask for it, because it could make the difference between life and death. It could impact the quality of care that you're receiving. Go ahead and ask. And even if you don't know what to ask for, is there something beyond this care that you're providing me that you can think of that would be of benefit to me in my situation right now?
I think you really said two things that stuck out to me. That what else? And that a minute ago you said no is not no. What are the other options? And I think that even applies more to just treatment and maybe surgery and stuff, but I can't pay for that. What other options are there? My insurance doesn't cover that. Now, what else can we do? And simply, what are the other options is a really good question to open the door to what else may be available to you. So as we begin to close out, I want to give each of you the opportunity to leave some final words, tips, or advice. Raquel, what would you want to tell everybody listening as your word of advice for them?
My words of advice would be to, when you're first diagnosed, it's easy to get lost with what I got to do, what appointments I got to do. And it kind of disassociate from your emotions. I feel like that's what I did. So I didn't really, there was a social worker available in the oncology clinic and I talked to her a few times, but I was just in survival mode. So I kind of, like I said, disassociated. So I think it's important to have a support system, people that you rely on who check in with you emotionally. And all these techniques, mindfulness and meditation, things like that. Those are good to have. And also above all else is, I mean, if you're spiritual or religious, whatever it is, praying for me, that really carried me through. My husband, and also just, like I said, I think advocating for myself has been the greatest lesson through all of this. That you're your greatest advocate, and don't be afraid to ask questions, complain, look things up, do your own research, because doctors only know so much. And also I feel that Western medicine, has its positives and negatives, and there's other schools of thought, Eastern medicine or Native American, whatever, however you want to look at it. So we're a body, but everything's connected. So I think that it's just, as a patient, I think that's something I learned a lot is, don't forget about everything else. Just because I'm treating my breast, there's everything else that I need to pay attention to as well.
Absolutely. The whole person care is paramount. You know what they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so to be your own best advocate, you do have to do that inner work and take care of your emotional self as well while navigating the physical health challenges. Katrece, what would be your final words of wisdom?
So my final words of wisdom, I love everything Raquel said. I would just add to that, you have a cancer tribe. You may feel like, this is the worst moment in your life. You may feel as if there's no hope, but there is hope in those who are surrounding you. It could be that the provider, it could be your family members, it could be any number of people. In that tribe, you need to identify someone as your care navigator. So not the patient navigator, but your care navigator to help you navigate all the different elements of the system, be it the healthcare system, the insurance, the financial, plight that you might be in because of this, this bill that you were not expecting, this humongous bill. There are different individuals who are out there that can assist you with each one of those things. But just like when everyone's offering to bring you meals and it's so hard to try to navigate just meal deliveries, it's just too much. You need someone who can assist you in that care coordination. So that's the biggest takeaway I have. Just having that person, whether it be a sibling, a family member. Even in one instance, I interviewed someone, and it was a church member who actually stood up and was there to actually help navigate this care support system for that individual. And just having that helps to alleviate a number of the stressors that you already feel with just a diagnosis, to know that there's someone there that is assisting you with these other pieces. It just makes a world of difference and allows your body and your spirit to focus on just the healing and not be so consumed with all the other pieces you feel are perhaps dropping, but they're assisting you in keeping those balls moving and rolling throughout your treatment.
I really do appreciate that. And that is important. People do want to help, and sometimes they don't know where to step in. So tell them, hey, you like to haggle over 5 cents? How about you call this insurer and talk through this bill and see what we can get removed? But yes, lean on your team where appropriate and where you feel that they can be of assistance. Jacinth, what are your final words for us?
So my final words are follow your instincts. Follow your instincts every step of the way, whether it be, you're sitting down to an appointment with your provider, it may be your first, second, or third visit. And, you're coming along in your treatment process, or you're at the beginning of your treatment process, and something's off, something's different. Your needs are no longer being met. It's okay to speak up about it. Say, hey, and I tend to be very open, and ask questions and say, what I'm feeling at that time. And that's very important. Follow your instincts. You know, if something's not working for you during your treatment process, after, speak up about it, because you never know unless you make that heard. And trust your gut. If it's not working for you, no one's going to know better than you, so that you can get it fixed. Changes can be made if you need a new provider, or, you know, your medications are, you know, causing certain side effects. Don't suffer in silence, you know, because you never know what the options are out there for you.
That's also very important. And sometimes, you know, we're not sure what direction to go in. But like you said, your instinct will never lead you wrong. If there's something that's amiss, your body will tell you.
Yeah.
And
And
so
you know,
you
we
need
put
to
a
listen
lot of
to it.
faith in our providers, but at the end of the day, it's your body, and you know it best. You know it best.
So as we wrap, let's share how our listeners can get in touch with you. And to our listeners, don't feel like you have to write this all down. I'll put it in the show notes. But Raquel, what are your social media handles? How do people get in touch with you if they want to discuss more with you?
I could be reached on my Instagram. It's RAK City 898, Rack City 898. And my email address, rogaz898@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Katrece?
You can reach me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. My handle is just at Katrece Nolan. That's KATRECE. And that's Nolan with an E, NOLEN. And you can email me also, Katrece@katricenolan.com.
And Katrece, where can we get your book?
You can get my book on Amazon or even on my website, katricenolan.com.
Wonderful. And Miss Jacinth, how can we get with you later?
So with me, my email is the best way to reach me. I don't really have a major social network presence. So my email is globalgreen. So that's GLOBALGR33N@gmail.com.
Well, wonderful. Ladies, I cannot thank you enough for your time. And I think this very important conversation that I think will help a lot of women, especially those that are newly diagnosed. And I feel like I'm even leaving armed. I'm in Houston, and Blue Cross Blue Shield and my provider, Memorial Hermann Hospital, you two, did not work out a new contract. So I have to get a whole new care team.
Oh, that's awful. I'm Blue Cross Blue Shield, but in Northern Virginia. So,
and I am so sad about it. But I feel like I'm more empowered to ask the important questions as I get a new care team and navigate, you know, starting all this process up again. And so I really thank you for this wealth of information. And I cannot wait for this episode to go live. So again, thank you all for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, ladies.
This has been fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.